Yo, what's going on, you guys? Today we have 5 ways British and American road trips are very different. I don't know what to expect in this video. The one thing I could think about is the views, maybe, because when you're on a road trip, it's good to have great views that you could actually look at while you drive, you know. So again, I don't know what to expect. We're gonna get straight to it. But before we even get to the video, we on our way to 10,000 subscribers. That's the goal. So if you guys could help us reach that goal, we really appreciate it. Let's get straight to the video. Come on.
My wife and I recently got back from a visit to West Virginia, and on that trip, it got me thinking, how do road trips compare between my homeland of Britain and the United States?
Okay.
And with America being the land of car culture and Britain that of public transit, Americans might be thinking, is a British road trip even a thing? And yes, it is. But in my experience of doing road trips in both countries, it's a very different thing. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But one other journey that I've been on recently is the long march to 1 million subscribers. If you've done that, thank you. If you haven't, do that now.
Tap and reach 1 million, man. Tap and reach 1 million. I'm sure all you guys watching already subscribed to him anyways.
In the meantime, here are 5 ways that British and American road trips are very different. Now, you can't really compare and contrast road trips in the United States with road trips in Britain without talking about the distance involved.
Okay.
So when we drove from Chicago to West Virginia, it was something like 400 miles. And if you were to take that distance as a percentage of the distance from the East Coast to the West Coast, it's not that much. However, if you were to do the same thing in Britain, you would end up in the sea. The point is, everyone knows at this point, America much larger than Britain. But what happens with that is that once you move to the United States, even having grown up in Britain, your perspective of distance changes.
Okay.
You see, it used to be that when I was a kid, we'd drive from Grimsby, my hometown, down to the southwest coast, and it took a few hours. We thought that was an eternity, because in British terms, that is. Remember, we're a country that's the size of Wyoming. But what struck me on this road trip recently is that I didn't really consider it that long at all. I mean, granted, I am now in my 40s, so my lower back felt it, but my brain didn't. You know, it was as if this was a normal thing to do. Of course, while I'm on the road, I get the peace of mind knowing that my name and address are far from the clutches of data brokers. You've probably heard me talk about them before. Data brokers are those entities that sell your personal information to people sites. I'm 99% sure that this is how Suburban Sue knew my age at that city council meeting about irksome millennials. And to combat this, in 2024, I used today's sponsor, Incogni. Incogni is a personal data removal tool that not only gets in touch with those data brokers...
I'm not going to skip this simply because I'm watching this video, so I might as well just watch the ads also, right?
But requests they take down your data. And it works too, because Incogni has saved me more than 150 hours of chasing down these entities and has removed my details from more than 200 sites. Head to incogni.com/lostinthepond to get your discount and to thereafter protect your data. The link is in my description below. Of course, there's one thing that I think probably helps.
You say what, personal what?
Below.
Personal space.
Of course, there's one thing that I think probably helps Americans get used to the idea of driving a bit further than we might in Britain, and that's the size of our vehicles. I may have mentioned it before, but not only is the country much bigger than the United Kingdom, but so are the cars. Not for us, we have a Prius. But you will see on American roads plenty of either trucks, which is great.
Oh yeah, I heard about that. I didn't even know that was a thing for. They said the cars are bigger. I drive a F-150 truck, Ford F-150. I mean that's a big car. But I've seen all different sizes of cars here. It's like, I don't know. People be saying in Europe the cars are smaller, so I don't know. I kind of want to see how small they're talking about.
And stuff, or those minivans. Now, that's not to say that we don't have either of those two things in Britain. They're just not as widely embraced as they are here. I've experienced this. I've travelled again to West Virginia years ago in a minivan because we had multiple people coming with us. And honestly, it was hell, now that I think about it, because there were too many people. We'd overestimated the space. But I could see a situation in where the minivan would be great. I'd have the whole 3 back seats to myself, and then everybody else has to squeeze together in front of me. Because that's just who I like my personal space. America gives me that. Just not in a Prius. In Britain, we're all about smaller vehicles. I think when I was a kid, we had a Fiat Uno, tiny hatchback, and I remember we drove fairly long distances in that. Of course, I was a child. I did silly things like, lift my legs up onto the seat, or put them across my brother, or in my mum's face. And I was smaller, so it was easier. I mean, this is doing a disservice to our larger vehicles, but the point is, pound for pound, you don't have quite as much space in British cars, so it's a good job we don't drive as far.
Okay, that makes sense.
But another thing that helps put into perspective the long distances that we may or may not be travelling is how we pass the time. I've noticed that it is a common feature of road tripping in either country to play a game. It's just that the game in question may well differ. Take, for example, road trip bingo. Played in both countries, this is where passengers whip out a bingo card and check off the things they see. Whoever completes their card first wins. However, it's become clear that the items on a US bingo card don't always match those on a British one. And that's because the scenery and the things that occupy it differ somewhat on either side of the pond. For example, the UK's sheep population is around 7 times greater than that of the US, meaning it's literally impossible to have a road trip in the UK without seeing them a lot. Then again, unless you're driving through the 4 states that have banned it, the same thing might be true in the US when it comes to billboards. I became aware of a game...
Wait, you guys don't have billboards like that? Oh yeah, everywhere you go you're gonna see one. You see those all the time. Yeah.
Growing up, called Spotto, and this is where you basically look out for a yellow car and then the person who sees it says Spotto. But after I moved to the US and I was driving around with my wife, she brought to my attention something I'd never heard of called pediddle. And believe it or not, that's not something that you do at a rest stop. This is another game. You and others are on the lookout for a car whose headlight is out, and when you see that, you're supposed to say "pediddle" and hit the roof, apparently, in order to determine who it was who said it first. And another pastime, specifically...
Never heard of that one before. That's interesting.
For the US is the license plate game. This is where passengers observe traffic for the license plates of different states, the ultimate goal being to tally up plates from all 50 states. No equivalent for this.
I've heard of that one before though.
This is in the UK, where real license plates, regardless of region, are plain old yellow. Spotto. That said, we do have a different number plate game, in which we might look out for number plates containing, say, a certain letter or number. But the biggest thing that I've noticed is that Americans are far more likely to break out into song. I thought this was a trope of the films because it happens in National Lampoon's Vacation and many others, until I got into a car with my wife's family. In Britain, I'm not saying we don't ever do that, but I think most of us are probably a bit self-conscious
West Virginia
about the way we sing, and so that doesn't happen as often. And if it does, we'd have to be drunk, and if we're drunk, we shouldn't be using a motor vehicle. What I'm saying is we reserve the singing for weddings. Now, it's one thing that Google Maps will tell me, ooh, look, it's 9 hours to travel from here to there. But what that doesn't take into account is the fact that you're going to have to stop a lot, especially since we have a dog with us. So along the way, we got out at what Americans know as rest stops. And a lot of the time, rest stops in the United States are sort of small buildings that usually house some bathrooms, as well as pamphlets displaying places to go in the local area. Occasionally, of course, you do find those larger rest stops that have a full-on food court and things like that. They exist as well. In Britain, there are 1 or 2 major differences when it comes to these outlets. Firstly, they're not called rest stops. They're known as motorway service areas, and these are usually the big kind of rest stops. You have your food court, you have your toilets. You also have a lot more parking space. Partly that's going to be down to the fact that even though we're about the size of Wyoming, we have nearly twice the population of California. And this might also account for the fact that your parking spot within this car park is usually timed. But it's also down to the fact that ample space is afforded to trucks, often known as lorries in Britain. It should be noted that the US concept of truck stops, in other words, stops used exclusively by trucks, are not nearly as common in the UK. The other thing to note here is that at British rest stops, there's usually a hotel attached to it, in case you need to stay there overnight. You don't typically find this at American rest stops because most towns or cities have a complex of hotels somewhere in its vicinity.
That makes sense.
Britain also has hotels, the likes of Travelodge and Premier Inn, and I'm not going to spend this time boring you with the differences between British and American hotels because I did that in a previous video. But what I am going to say is that there's a cheaper alternative in the United States that a lot of road trippers capitalise on, and that alternative is motels. Motels did originate in the United States as a portmanteau of motor hotels, and they are bog standard. About the term I would use for every motel that I've ever stayed in. There's no swimming pool, there's no jacuzzi or hot tub or anything like that. It's basically just a room, and then you've got the manager's office. It's like in Psycho. We've all seen the Bates Motel. Most motels feel like that. I've never been murdered, as proven by the fact that I'm still doing this video, but I have felt like there's somebody in the room with me, and it's usually my wife, and everything's fine. From the British side of things, I have two things to say here. Firstly, because we don't travel such great distances, there might be an argument that we don't really need to stop off anywhere en route to where we're actually ending up. So a lot of the time we don't end up making that sort of overnight stay in the middle of our journey. But if we were to do it, in my experience, we used to just check into one of those Premier Inn hotels or a Travelodge. Now, I'm not entirely sure if that's normal among all Brits who travel, or if it's just another indication that my family is really middle class. Anyway, let me know in the comments if you've been on a road trip in Britain and America and what your observations were. In the meantime, I'm going to go and read about what to do in West Virginia, even though I am now home. While I'm doing that, here's a video I did back in the day about the hotel differences between Britain and America. You'll watch that next. Until next.
This was a good video, man. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I mean, road trips. It's kind of similar. We just do different things, but I think a road trip is a road trip. You know, it's just the only difference I guess I would say is just really the distance. Yeah, we just drive further than you guys. I guess that's the only difference in my opinion, for real. But yeah, I mean, thank you guys for watching with me. I appreciate it. Continue to like, continue to comment, continue to subscribe. I appreciate it very much, man. The goal is 10,000 subscribers, so please continue to subscribe. I'll catch you on the next one. Bye bye.